Hey guys, Ryan here. As you all know, Anomicon is fastly approaching. This is a free virtual conference I founded last year that featured dozens of speakers presenting on all things anomalous. It was a huge hit, and I decided to do it again this September 1st and 2nd. You can learn more at anomicon.com. All this to say, between this, working on my next book, and the new wrestling podcast, it's been a little tough to make new episodes of Somewhere in the Skies. But don't worry, we're not going anywhere. But just for this week, I am borrowing a wonderful conversation that I had with Rob Kristoffersen about the Voronezh UFO incident and various other UFO and close encounter cases out of Russia. This originally was released on the Our Strange Skies podcast, but being as Our Strange Skies has ended, Rob is allowing me to rebroadcast the episode right here on Somewhere in the Skies. It is a super fun and laid-back episode with some of the most bizarre Russian UFO encounters on record. So, a special thanks to Rob and a special thanks to you for listening. We'll see you here next week for an all-new episode. And I'll see you at Anomicon on September 1st and 2nd. But for now, enjoy the Voronezh UFO incident and UFOs of Russia.
This is Somewhere in the Skies with Ryan Sprague.
Today we're talking about, Russia's most famous UFO case, but also talking about the activity that was going on in Russia around the time of the Voronezh landing. And it's very interesting because when we look at UFO reports coming out of Russia, for a long time, they seem to be just like leaked to some of the folks that were writing about UFOs in journals and magazines and stuff like that. Like Gordon Creighton talked about how he had a source and how he basically just kind of lost touch with that source, assuming that they had died at some point. But just for a long time, UFOs used to be something very secret out of Russia. And that's not to say that our government was the most forthcoming about UFOs at during the 40s through the late 60s. So, there's definitely a mirroring there, probably a little more visible and more reports from the United States definitely made their way across the continent. But in 1989, we see things starting to change in Russia. In late September and early October, Soviet news agencies began publishing stories of UFO landings and occupant encounters from around Western Russia, and including a dramatic one that we're going to be talking about in Voronezh, which is it's in eastern Russia. It's not really too far from Voronezh itself, but when the Voronezh landing kind of broke, because it became a national headline across the entire world. It was
Right.
Things were translated in countless different languages, but it was on October 9th, 1989, that the Soviet news agency, TASS, reported the incredible close encounter of the third kind case from the city of Voronezh. And Voronezh is an industrial city of nearly 1 million residents. I think the number that they gave was around 900,000 at the time. And they produced everything from machinery to cigarettes. And it's located about 300 miles away from Moscow. And near Mendeleev Street in Yuzhny Park, otherwise known as South Park. So
yes, Cartman.
exactly, like I every time I read that, I can't not think of South Park. I can't not think
I'm
of
thinking of
Cartman.
Cartman smoking cigarettes at that cigarette factory in Russia. He's got a little sickle and hammer on his coat. It's perfect, man.
You guys totally see that UFO that's landing in that park right over there?
Oh god, we got to get on this, man. The
Yeah.
UFO episode. Wait, wasn't the first South
Yeah.
Park episode about an alien abduction? If
Yeah, it
I'm
was about
remembering.
an alien abduction and an anal probe that led
Yep.
to a satellite dish coming out of Cartman's ass. So you
Wow.
can't go wrong.
Good tangent there, man. Good tangent.
Absolutely. So there were a number of boys and girls that attended school number 33. And at first they witnessed this strange pink glow in the sky at around 6:30 p.m. Vasya Shurin, Jenya Blinov, and a few other students were actually playing soccer nearby. And most of the people in the park at that time were children between the ages of about 9 and 12, just hanging out, playing sports and all that good stuff. And this object turned from a pink to a deep red as it descended toward the park. Its shape was described as everything from a ball to an egg to even a banana, which is very strange because everything seems to kind of get funneled into one shape when you have a mass UFO sighting like this. Especially,
Right.
we covered, and it hasn't made it to the main feed yet, but it's been released on the Patreon, is the aerial school landing. And those kids pretty much all described something very different.
Mhm.
They drew things. They were very unique. Some were like, bullet shaped objects with windows on it. Some were cylindrical. Some were, a lot of them were your classic saucers that had portholes on them and stuff like that. So
Right.
this gets condensed down into like a spherical object is what these kids end up seeing. And that became the popular consensus that the news stories picked up. And it flew above the children, doing these concentric circles over the park before vanishing. And it reappeared minutes later, descending and just hovering about 12 meters or 40 feet above the park. A 3-meter, 10-foot tall aperture opened on the side of the craft, and light from the inside started to flood out. But it was soon replaced by the silhouette of this tall, burly figure.
Hmm.
Their movements were slow, but whoever this was, they were just insanely tall, nearly as tall as the aperture itself. Their head was strange, quote, like a small hemisphere set between the shoulders. And the best equivalent that I can come up with for the Voronezh aliens is Juggernaut from the X-Men. Like,
Oh my god, man. I'm looking at the image right now, one of the artist renderings. Yes, this is Juggernaut. I mean, through and through. I'm the Juggernaut, bitch. Sorry. You might
exactly.
have
No,
to,
that's exactly what that alien is thinking.
that's what he came out and said, yeah.
That video is still, that YouTube video is still classic even to this day.
Oh
You can't go
god.
wrong.
It's insane. It looks just like Juggernaut. Like
Yeah.
if your listeners go and look at the artist renderings of this thing, and the fact that it was as tall as the opening of the craft. I mean, God, he must have been crammed in that thing. His back must have been killing him.
Yeah, that's a work hazard right there. And I seriously hope they've got comp of some kind that they are offered for taking this job and bringing their asses to Russia, of all places.
To South Park, yep.
Oh yeah,
Sorry,
to
please
South.
continue.
No, you're good. To South Park, anal probes and ass satellites. Yeah, ass satellites.
I like that.
Yeah. So they had this figure had 3 luminous dots on their head, 2 of which produced a white light, while the third, placed slightly above what you would call maybe 2 eyes, it glowed red. And this third eye was described as movable, swiveling around like a radar.
Hmm.
And this being seemed to scan the horizon for a period of time before the aperture closed and the craft descended toward the ground. This spherical object was large, some describing it as about 9 meters or 30 feet wide, and while other witnesses said it was about 15 meters or 50 feet long to 4 meters or 13 feet wide and 7 meters or 22 feet high. So,
Damn. It's all
yeah,
over the place.
it is all over the place. I think that just gets into the idea that we are not good at judging size very well.
Well, and like you mentioned, man, mass UFO sightings, you're going to get these discrepancies, especially with children. Like, they don't know how to properly measure things. Like, what's the first thing we do when someone sends us, like, a UFO video or says, like, you know, what should I do to properly take a photo? Well, it's like, put something in context. Make sure there's a tree in there. Make sure there's a building so we could say, oh, it was above the building, so it's at least 40 feet high, you know, in the sky, blah, 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 blah. So I get it. I get why there's so much discrepancy.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I remember watching, I think it was an episode of Monster Quest back in the day where they were trying to set up this experiment to see how, if people could judge size from distance, and they failed miserably every single one of them. So, I mean, it's definitely a thing.
Yep.
So this aperture, it opened up again, and from it emerged 3 beings. In some reports, it says 1 being, but the consensus in the reporting up front was that there were 3 beings that emerged from this craft, and they were 3 to 4 meters tall, or about 9 to 13 feet. They wore silver-colored overalls and bronze boots, and I gotta say, the fashion choices here, I'm behind it. I'm here for it.
I'm here for it, man. This is like some Vegas showgirl boot sort of thing. It reminds me of like the X-Men comics, like the old school X-Men, where they all had those big stripper boots that they wore, even the guys, and these flashy tights. And these artist renderings are just incredible. I can't take my eyes off of them.
Yeah, I love all the artwork that was made for the Voronezh landing, because there are some very artistic interpretive pieces, and then there's the straight to the point sketches, and then there are some that are just like, probably they could be displayed in a museum just by how amazing and elaborate they look. And another distinguishing feature about what these beings wore, there was kind of this like circular emblem on their chest, and they were accompanied by a small, boxy, robot-like creature. One of the taller beings seemed to attend to this robot briefly, just like bending over and kind of like pushing a button or something, and when it did, it started to walk around on its own.
Nice.
And in later reports, especially when Jacques Vallée got involved in this case, because kind of like John Mack when he went to the aerial school, Jacques Vallée showed up in Russia, I want to say like 3 months after this incident had taken place. He talked to many of the kids, and I think it's from his reporting primarily that we get that there was particularly 1 being instead of 3, but regardless, they circled around their craft several times, and one of the beings emitted like a number of strange sounds, which it seemed to be that one was giving orders to the others, and a beam of light shone down from their chest, creating a series of triangles that were 30 centimeters or 11 inches by 50 centimeters or 19 inches. And in other reports, it was said that this being created like this large luminous square right in the ground. And then the beings and the craft itself just completely disappeared for about 5 minutes.
Okay. Well, Rob, I'd love to get your thoughts on this. This idea of the beings or the occupants running around the craft. I mean, that's identical, correct me if I'm wrong, to the Zimbabwe case. Didn't the kids in that case mention that one of the beings was running around the perimeter of the craft as if like trying to fix something or like, I don't know, scope out the area. But that's exactly what I thought of when you said that was what is it with these beings? Like, are they coming in to, did something go wrong and they're trying to repair it? That's what it sounds like more to me with this case. It's, one being is yelling orders to another, trying to get the little robot box dude to do their bidding. I don't know, fix the tailpipe. I don't know, but yeah, it is really interesting that you have many of these child witnessed UFO cases where they say that the beings are running around the craft.
Yeah, exactly. There are definite parallels to the aerial school landing, and just there was some kids that said they saw these beings just like bouncing all around the craft, one of which was like standing on top of the thing. But yeah, there are definite parallels to draw here, and like the repair cases, because we just covered a repair case on last week's episode, and the idea that like these UFOs just seem to like break down all the time, or like it just seems like there's a lot of time in which it's either soil samples or they're fixing their shit, basically.
Yeah, man. I mean, we talked about that in our Africa episode over on Somewhere in the Skies. Like, these things happen. They travel how many light years away? Nothing's going to go as you planned. I mean, come on. How many satellites have we crashed out in space? How many probes have gone missing that we've never found? It just, it happens. So, even if they're, thousands of years ahead of us, it's still, nothing is perfect. Even with these aliens in South Park in Russia, it's just not going to happen. Not going to happen.
No, and I mean, we've all up until the James Webb Space Telescope like fully deployed, like the other day, everybody was like with bated breath, like God, hoping that everything would go.
I was like, please let everything go okay. And there's still work to be done, but we're on our way.
Yes, we are. By the time that the beings in the craft just reappeared, the audience had grown. There were a lot of adults that had joined the children, and there were some additional children that also joined in on this. And the reappearance of them caused one of the a nearby boy to cry out in fear, and in response, one of the beings paralyzed him with just this hypnotic glare or something like that. Just looked right at him, and he's just like, "You're done. Stop moving."
Damn, dude, that is like the stare of death. Apparently, that would have been me. I would have been that boy to cry out in fear. Out of everyone there, no matter how many UFO cases I've looked into, if I was there in '89 experiencing this, I would be the one to cry out in fear. So I feel for this kid. I do. This is crazy, though. Like, just paralyzed him with a glance.
Yes. And when this being, this leader-like being reappeared, he had some weird-looking rod in his hand, and he pointed it at another boy and shot him with a beam of light. And when he did this, it caused him to just disappear.
Wow. Okay. All right. This is terrifying, dude. Mm-hmm. I'm not gonna lie. Like, we could joke about the Juggernaut, but like paralyzing people, disappearing. Like, where'd the kid go?
Right. Like, in the comics, the Juggernaut, he's just an unstoppable force. But when you give the Juggernaut a wand, things get increasingly scarier.
Get increasingly more Harry Potter-ish, if you will.
Yes. What happens when Juggernaut goes to Hogwarts?
That is definitely a crossover I want to see.
Yeah, totally. The boy reappeared just a few minutes later after the beings and their robot had re-entered their craft, and it had shot off into the air. And the residents of Voronezh, they were very wary following this incident of September 27th. And in response, the mayor, Viktor Atlasov, and the parliamentary deputy, Gennady Kabasian, established an independent commission composed of scientists, criminologists, doctors, meteorologists, and actually UFO investigators. So we've got a melding of
Nice.
a lot of different people from all walks of light to come together to study this. And they formed the Voronezh branch for the study of anomalous phenomenon, and it was officially commissioned, but they were not actually the only ones during this time that formed. There was the Voronezh branch of the Alexander Popov Scientific and Electronic Association. They were an independent commission who investigated the landing site and documented UFO cases from around the area in the days and weeks leading up to and following the Voronezh landing. So this department, this UFO group, was essentially set up under, I think the best way to put it would be like their electricians union in a way.
So it would be like Con Edison here in New York being the ones in charge of like a UFO landing.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm in. Yeah.
At the landing site, several marks were noted on the ground. Circular depressions set in a circular pattern, 18 meters or about 60 feet wide. 4 holes noted the spot where the feet had supported the craft. They were 15 centimeters or 6 inches in diameter and 4 centimeters or about 1.5 inches deep. Others claim that the holes were deeper, upwards of 25 to 30 centimeters or about 9 to 11 inches in diameter, and 20 to 25 centimeters or 7 to 9 inches deep. So there were additional holes that were noted, about 2 of them. They were 38 centimeters or about 15 inches deep, suggesting that soil samples had been taken. Not far from these holes was an area of also flattened grass. And taking the marks into consideration, they determined that the craft weighed approximately 11 tons.
Ooh. That is heavy.
Beefy. That thing is beefy.
Beefy craft, yep. Dang.
Yeah. Some news agencies reported that there was an intense magnetic field found, and though no consensus was reached on this aspect, gamma radiation was found to be present at the site. Higher than background readings were detected in the soil from the landing marks, and according to Vallet's investigation, a spot directly underneath the craft itself. Investigators used a multidisciplinary tactic to carry out the investigation. Geiger counters and other meters were used in the area. 17 soil samples were taken. But they also used, interestingly enough, they called it biolocation, but we would call it dowsing. So like dowsing rods. They also had some other type of instruments. So if you could read the first quote there.
Yeah, sure. This is a direct quote from the investigators. As dowsing gear, they used single-cell water plants in a test tube. At the area below where the craft had reportedly been hovering, the plants distributed themselves uniformly, producing an even greenish light. Outside that area, they gathered themselves together clearly visible, parallel, dark green colored veins. Oof.
Yeah, just using plants to confirm UFO landing sites. That's...
I remember when Valet first heard of, he was like, so what are you guys, how you doing this? And they're like, oh, biolocation. And he's like, what the hell is that? Like, he had no idea what they were talking about. Like, he was supposed to know it. And they're like, duh. And then they explained to him that quote I just gave you. So Valet was like, okay, I guess we're doing this now, and I guess the electrical companies are now involved with investigating UFOs. Cool, got it.
All a different tactic and all probably more organized than what we do in the United States.
Oh, for sure. That is for damn sure.
For all intents and purposes, both groups took the investigation seriously, entertaining all sides and no sides at the same time. The story of the Voronezh landing appeared in print all across the world, including a piece in the New York Times. Stanislav Kadmensky, I think that's how
That was good.
goes.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Professor of nuclear physics at the University of Voronezh, commented,
He said, quote, if a landing by a UFO at Voronezh were to be proved, then it would mean that we have something to learn about the special theory of relativity, and it would indicate that there exists another sort of physics that is at present unknown to us.
the mayor, Viktor Atlasov, expressed his belief in what the children were saying. Even the Russian Orthodox Church weighed in on the matter. Rumors that Christians were praying at the landing site were big. The Moscow Weekly News contacted the church, who in response said,
Quote, it is an act of Satan, not of God. A true Christian would never go to that place in the park to pray. Wow, man. Leave it to the the Orthodox Church to weigh in and put a downer on this whole thing immediately.
the Orthodox Church does not fuck with UFOs at all.
Apparently not. Apparently, at least not back then. I mean, it looks like the churches are getting more and more involved nowadays, but yeah, they were not having it back in '89, I can tell you that much. At least not in Russia.
Yeah, definitely. Both groups were able to find additional eyewitnesses around Voronezh that reported UFO sightings in the region. And in fact, they found sightings ranging from September 21st to October 3rd. On the 27th in particular, they found several witnesses to UFO activity in Voronezh. Lieutenant Sergei Matveyev of the Voronezh militia stated,
Quote, on September 27th at about 7 p.m., I was walking in the area of the park. Suddenly, I noticed a luminous ball sweeping past on a northerly course at an extraordinary speed, strictly horizontally at an altitude of roughly 600 feet. I estimated its diameter to be roughly 45 feet.
Yuri Petrovich, I'm not giving that last name. I don't know why I bothered writing it down, but yeah. Yuri Petrovich, another witness, reported,
quote, on September 27th, between 6 and 7 p.m., I saw from my balcony a reddish sphere appearing over the horizon. It flew at a relatively low altitude toward the left bank of the river, hovering over the village of Atroshka, and then it disappeared behind the houses. It was not moving fast. It flew at a speed of a small plane.
Following the initial sighting of the object at South Park, there were additional sightings around Voronezh, most notably at a local power station.
Yeah, this one really caught my attention, Rob. I know Valet commented on this. He's like, this ain't just about three-eyed aliens. We're talking about like UFOs over nuclear power plants, which is a big thing. So, yeah, I'll read this one here. Quote, around 9 p.m., for 5 to 10 minutes, I observed a fairly large flattened sphere shaped like an orange. This happened in the vicinity of the mining equipment plant. I experienced a feeling of intense fear for which I could not account.
The most dramatic encounter came from a witness that Jacques Vallée had interviewed. N.M. Polyakov was a factory worker in Voronezh, and it's unclear if his sighting took place on or around that particular day, but regardless, he and a few of his friends had an intense UFO encounter in September of 1989.
Okay, yeah, get ready for this one. Hey everyone, Ryan Sprague here, host of Somewhere in the Skies. If you've ever thought about supporting us, we have great 2 easy options for you right now. If you listen to the show on Apple Podcasts, you can click the subscribe button at the top of your Apple feed. Or you can join our Patreon at patreon.com/somewhereskies. Both of these options give you the same benefits. Early access to the main show, bonus episodes and content, and priority to ask our guests your listener questions. So, to help support Somewhere in the Skies, click that subscribe button on Apple or visit patreon.com/somewhereskies. Thank you so much for your support, and keep looking up. Quote, at the end of September, we were driving to the southern suburb of Voronezh. All of a sudden, our headlights went out. The radio died out in the middle of a song. The engine died too. The car coasted, giving us a chance to get on the shoulder of the road. We tried to turn the ignition key back and forth in vain. The driver wanted to have a smoke, but the car lighter did not work. He took out some matches, but they would not ignite. The driver threw away a cigarette in frustration, and he went out to take a look under the hood. And then I heard his voice with a tone of intense surprise. Look, quick! He stood there with his arm outstretched, pointing toward the sky behind the car. I turned around and saw a pinkish-yellow sphere shining dimly above the road about 300 feet away. It was hard to tell its size because of the distance, but I'm certain that its diameter was over 30 feet. At the bottom of the sphere, there was a protuberance that reminded me of a ball-shaped growth on a tree. That's very specific. Suddenly, a light appeared from it, not very bright, trembling and flickering. The beam came down and slowly moved along the ground towards us. It seemed strange that the surface touched by the ray was full of bluish sparkles, and everything was quivering as if we were in a haze on a hot day. Once in a while, there was a blinding flash that was reflected by the surface. When the beam approached the car, I experienced an unpleasant fear. I felt constrained. I did not want to move or do anything. My good mood disappeared without a trace. Debbie Downer, man. He immediately went from 1 to 100 in depression on this one.
Yeah.
The ray moved over the car hood. The engine started to smoke the way it does when the radiator overheats. There was a feeling of something slipping in. The car moved and something appeared on the driver's seat. I sensed an alien presence. I felt that I could stretch my arm and touch the invisible being. And although my brain and my willpower ordered my hand to touch the unpleasant thing, I could not move my arm. What was it? Fear? Was I like a rabbit hypnotized by a cobra? I love it. That is a dynamite description. As a writer, this guy, I need to hire this guy to write my episodes, Rob. All right, here's his last quote, I promise. Then the ray moved away. Then I could breathe easier. For several seconds, it was dark and quiet. And then, great! The dashboard lit up. The radio came back on as if nothing had happened. The driver turned on the engine.
It's interesting to note there's a similarity with which the being, this alien presence that appears in this car. Mm-hmm. Over on the Patreon, one of the first bonus episodes that I put up was kind of these handful of incidents that I hadn't covered from Africa on the main show, so I brought them over to the Patreon, and there was one incident in particular. It was an abduction case in which this couple that was driving from Zimbabwe to South Africa had this like hours-long abduction experience in which a UFO pretty much kind of like followed them all the way from Zimbabwe to South Africa. But at one point, the main witness in the case described how, and this was under hypnosis, that there was like an alien being that was teleported into his car. He never turned around to look at it, but just he felt this presence that was in his car. So it's interesting to see the similarities here. You know, aliens just beaming themselves into other people's cars like some rude asses here.
or Rob, you know, the cases where they beam the abductee in and out. I just finished an episode on the Denise Stoner alien abductions, and same thing. Like, there was a point where her car was like in a suspended animation, and the beings teleported her out, left the husband, and then vice versa. So it's really interesting how, like, without the consent, it's just like they are dematerializing people or themselves and just popping up wherever they damn well please. It's intrusive to say the least.
Very intrusive. Just no consent at all in this situation, which is it's just a problem because it's scary as fuck. But in the aftermath of the sighting, he turned to the driver and said, "What could all of this mean?" And the driver turned to him, puzzled, wondering what he meant. The driver couldn't remember the car stopping, or perhaps he was just choosing not to remember. So after these folks have this dramatic encounter with this weird UFO and they beam an alien into their car, one of the witnesses says, "I don't know what you're talking about, man. Did we even stop the car? I don't think we did."
Oh God, that's so creepy. Well, and I also love that the driver, after this all happens, the first thing he says is, "What could all this mean?"
Yeah.
Like he's immediately going to like the philosophical conversation that could be had about all this. Not like what is going on? What just happened? We got to get out of here. What could all this mean in the grand scheme of things? That's what I love. But yeah, man, did this even happen? That's the real question.
Yeah, and he was not convinced, and I can imagine how frustrating that has to be to a UFO witness when you experience something this dramatic, and the person that was standing there right next to you when it happened just either chooses not to believe that it happened or
Right.
doesn't recognize that it even did happen. So yeah, that's troubling.
That's tough. Yeah, I've spoken to so many people who've been in the same situation where they've been right next to someone and had a completely different experience or no experience at all. So yeah, it's got to be frustrating. I can't even imagine.
Yeah. Details of the additional landings around Voronezh between September 21st and October 3rd are scant, but in addition to the large hulking humanoid and his boxy robot friend, eyewitnesses reported a third kind of being that were small, in the neighborhood of 4 feet tall, with grayish green faces and wore blue overcoats. So I one of the things that's frustrating about the Voronezh landing and all the coverage that it's given and everything that comes after is that the people that investigated it said, we found a bunch of different cases between these dates, and yet there's not a lot that are published. So
Right.
I don't understand why that is. Even Valet didn't publish them in the one book that he did write after taking his trip to Russia, and in which he covered the Voronezh landing and such. So it's kind of just frustrating how we don't have information about any of these other incidents.
Yeah, and it too, like, this is kind of what happens when you have a mass UFO sighting. I've noticed in some of my research looking at the Phoenix Lights or what was that other one in, it wasn't Zimbabwe, but there was another case in, was it Wales where it happened? Oh gosh, it's escaping me, Rob. But yeah, when you have these mass UFO sightings, you start to see all these other incidents that seem to occur around the same time. And you have to wonder, is this because people are being influenced by that mass UFO sighting? Are they now paranoid or hysterical that something is going to happen to them? So everything immediately becomes a UFO, or every street light going out is going to be a craft coming in for a landing. I can understand how that paranoia could seep in, and you would start hearing all these really weird stories from your neighbor and your grocer and everyone in between. But yeah, thank God that Valet came out with that book, man. What was it? UFO Chronicles of the Soviet Union.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, because if he hadn't come out with all those other cases that happened around this time, we never would have known about them, because Russia was still being very tight-lipped on what was going on. But like you said, this case became so big that they couldn't choose to ignore it, even if they wanted to in Russia.
Yeah, exactly. It just kind of blew the lid off of their UFO coverage in the country, and just it definitely it brought down the secrecy, and within the coverage that Flying Saucer Review in particular had of this stuff and the stuff that they were given, because they were sent a lot of information from people from Russia, in that they chronicled how for a long period of time you could not publish anything about UFOs, especially during the last parts of the Cold War. Up until about 1989, everything was tight-lipped. You couldn't say anything about it. And then, people are leaking out UFO reports to other countries, the UK and the United States and stuff. But this incident happens, and it's just like, well, let's just drop all this UFO secrecy. Let's let everything out there.
Right. And part of me wonders if this was all a strategic plan,
right?
As I'm sure we'll talk about a little later. But yeah, you do have to wonder, was it the dam breaking finally, or was this all part of some big disinformation campaign, which a lot of people have talked about in the past? So I'm sure we'll get there, but I'm getting ahead of you.
Nearly a month after the incident, the Voronezh branch of the study of anomalous phenomenon determined that there was no evidence that aliens had landed in South Park on September 29th, 1989. And you can imagine how much of an uproar the UFO community was in over this.
Oh, yeah. Again, it's just like the freaking governor in Phoenix saying nothing happened in Phoenix. Back when that happened, they were probably pissed.
Yeah.
Especially if they were one of those kids getting zapped by a rod or a magic wand.
Yeah, seriously. Also, Voronezh aliens, give me a call. I want to know how I can get one of those. And yet, as the secrecy around the UFO subject lessened, reports of additional sightings around central Russia began to emerge. In late June and early July, residents of various cities reported a myriad of objects and humanoids, but sightings actually go back to about April of that year. The earliest sighting occurred on April 24th, 1989, at around 10:45 p.m. Miss TV Golovatskaya saw a brilliant glowing object from a balcony of her house. This squarish object projected a green beam of light toward the ground, which illuminated the area as if it were daytime. Another witness to this incident, Antonina Dmitrievna, recalled that the object was 10 to 12 meters or 32 to 39 feet long with a blunt nose and created a fish-shaped tail behind it. According to a fisherman who had seen the same object, when the light first came on, 4 humanoids were visible inside, 2 of which moved to the rear of the craft. At 3 a.m. that night, V. Prudnikov was driving his car when it suddenly stalled. Then everything all around him became bright as day. He tried to start his car engine again and again, but it would not start. That was when he caught sight of a gigantic mushroom-shaped object that was only 2 meters or 6 feet tall, standing on a number of legs. After the object departed, he met a driver further on who thought he was nuts.
I'm glad they stuck that last note in there.
Oh, yeah.
He met another driver who clearly thought he was insane.
Yes.
Yeah.
On June 17th, VR Mironov and several eyewitnesses saw a shining ball in the sky. According to their report, it resembled the moon, but was yellowish-gray in color. It hung low in the sky, and when the witnesses came close to it, a human face appeared on the object itself. All right, that's just creepy as shit.
That's like, ugh. Yeah, that's like some man on the moon crap right there. Why was it a human face? That's what I want to know.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard of anything like this?
No. I've never heard of like projections on the UFO itself of faces and things.
This is a first. Yeah.
Yes. And then things are going to get a little stranger here. To quote the report, then suddenly a hat appeared on the ball.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Soon it assumed the appearance of an ingot of pig iron, changing color from yellow to crimson, while in the middle a gray stripe now appeared.
What the hell is an ingot of pig iron?
It's just like basically like a small. It's just a small like amount of iron that you would like maybe melt down to,
Okay.
like make into something.
Gotcha. Yeah, that one threw me. I wasn't quite sure what that was, but that's good to know. Okay.
I
Some
liked,
context.
yeah, I liked how descriptive they got with it.
Yeah, man.
Then a flashing spot lit up dimly. It lit up for 2 minutes or so until from it there appeared the outline of an aircraft in a dive. Then a couple minutes later, the aircraft turned into a tank. Like,
Whoa.
this feels like some, I don't know, some like deceptive technology or some shit.
I
Like,
was just gonna say that.
yeah.
Holograms, some really high tech stuff going on here. I remember talking to Nick Redfern, the UFO researcher, about Rendlesham, and how he thought a lot of that could have been holograms messing with these dudes out on this military base. So maybe we're seeing some of the same stuff going on here. This is some 9 years after the Rendlesham Forest incident. So, gosh, the technology was probably even better then.
And I mean, now look, you've got projectors that can project holiday images on your house during Christmas.
Exactly. Yep, we're seeing the early versions of this being tested on people in Russia, unfortunately. This is all just for Christmas decorations, guys.
Yeah.
Don't worry. There's no aliens coming to Russia. Just Christmas decorations.
This is a marketing scheme. We have figured it out.
It.
So,
Genius.
yes, absolutely genius. And then the image on it faded out, and 3 shining points began to sparkle, forming a glowing isosceles triangle. The performance ended as suddenly as it had begun, and the UFO had vanished. Things are going to get a lot weirder here. The most dramatic encounter during this wave of sightings came from the village of Konotsevo. A small group of children, Sergei, Sasha, Marina, Olya, Lyuda, they were returning from a nearby river at the time. It was around 3:30 p.m. on June 6th when the youngest child, Sasha, noticed a quote-unquote kite in the sky. It's interesting to note here, and this was emphasized in the report that was printed in Flying Saucer Review. The children of Konotsevo did not fly kites. And in fact, they had never seen, they might have seen kites before, but they emphasized they did not fly kites in Konotsevo.
Kites are banned. I wonder why. I wonder why they were so anti-kite in Konotsevo. That's pretty interesting. I want to look at the history of that. Maybe the town, the mayor had a fear of kites, or maybe his family was killed by a kite or something. I don't know.
Yeah, totally.
It's like Footloose, man. Out banning dancing, we're out banning kites in Konotsevo.
Yes. I think this has like, Burgermeister vibes from Santa Claus is Coming to Town banning toys. Yeah. It's got that vibe.
Yep. Again, these notes are so specific. I love it. Only you could find this stuff, man.
Oh man, you gotta love it. You gotta love stuff like this. So this kite, it started to grow in size and its shape became more defined. It was now a bright shining ball, 4 meters or 13 feet in diameter. It continued to grow in size as it approached the ground. When the ball touched down, it rolled in the direction of some bushes, stopped, and simultaneously split in 2. The 2 sides fell away, and a figure stepped out from the object.
Naturally. Okay.
Yes. The children claim this figure to be more robotic in nature. They were, quote, headless, with a short, flattened torso, long legs, and inordinately long arms, which almost touched the ground. When the being walked, his hands and feet did not bend. But he walked very easily and confidently, straight ahead, as if on an absolutely flat road. End quote. This is interesting because that particular area was not flat at all. It was very rough terrain.
Okay. That's terrifying.
Yeah. Yep. Not a fan. Not a fan at all. This being started to move toward the town of Konitsevo at the same time that a woman in a red dress was walking from the town. From her vantage point, she was not able to see the alien, and the children started to yell out to her.
Watch out, woman in the red dress. I'm glad we had to know that the dress was red, too. It's very, very important to put this all into context.
I feel like it's some kind of like conditioning thing, like with the Matrix, like you're supposed to watch out for this, the woman in the red dress.
That's very good. Yep.
Unfortunately, she was unable to hear them, and she continued her approach. The being disappeared from sight before the woman could see them, and when she reached the spot where they had disappeared, she too disappeared.
No. What?
Yes.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Okay, this is a glitch in the Matrix, man. Oof.
Totally a glitch in the Matrix.
Oh, that just gave me chills when you said that. I'm sorry. I hadn't read this. We were sharing notes before we started recording, and I didn't read this part. That's really scary.
It is utterly terrifying. Like the child in the Voronezh case, she reappeared 40 meters or 131 feet from where she had disappeared. So she reappears, and not long after, a second spherical object appeared and settled down close to the other one, where a similar being emerged in a similar fashion. At one point, the being turned toward the children when they were yelling, and here's another direct quote from this report.
Okay, quote, as he strode off through the village, the visitor, in a black one-piece suit, turned around and looked back, and then the children perceived that, seen from the side, he was absolutely flat, and that on his chest he had a shining ball or oval about 30 to 40 centimeters or 11 to 15 inches wide.
Completely flat, so he's like two-dimensional.
Two-dimensional, okay. What is going on in Russia, man? This is like some crazy hologram stuff, I'm telling you.
Mm-hmm.
Ugh.
An investigation group from Yaroslav was quick to arrive and investigate this case. The woman in the red dress was located, but chose not to elaborate on her story to investigators and wanted to remain anonymous.
But her dress was red.
The dress was indeed red.
Just in case you guys were wondering.
Yes, it was absolutely red. This detail cannot be.
I'm not letting it go, Rob. Yeah.
Many of the children underwent hypnosis and affirmed what they had seen, adding few details in the process.
Mm-hmm.
These children were not the only people to see a being like this that summer. Lyubov Medvedeva, I probably butchered that, but that's fine. A milkmaid at Rasavet Collective Farm stated to investigators, quote, at about 4:30 a.m. on July 16, I saw a dark figure coming quickly towards me. In height, it was taller than the average human, but the legs were short and stubby. The arms were long, reaching below the knees. On the shoulders, instead of a head, there was only a small knob. When it was 20 meters or 65 feet from me, I was paralyzed by it. Suddenly, the figure lit up and then vanished. I ran to the farm, and when I looked back, the figure appeared again and was still approaching. End quote. The Lyubov, along with a boilerman named V. Chikodanov, made plans to ambush the figure. Okay, let's just unpack that for a second.
Yeah,
you ran away from this thing, and you're gonna make plans to ambush it?
I'm telling you, his confidence just skyrocketed after that thing vanished. He's like, oh, it's gone. Oh, well, I could have taken it. I definitely could have taken it. And now that it's back, he's like... Maybe not. Maybe not headless thing with a knob for a head. I'm good on that.
Yeah, I just it's just
That
so
there's a
so
lot to unpack here, man. I
yeah.
just these figures appearing and disappearing. Like you had mentioned, the paralyzation throughout a lot of these close encounters as well is extremely alarming.
It is. And the similarities, because we I covered the Keneal case with Red Pill Junkie, and the fact that these cases, the Voronezh landing and that case occurred like 2 days apart from each other, and they share a lot of the similar features to them, including beings that go invisible, and just like tall hulking figures that just show up, and UFOs that are seen and stuff like that. It's interesting that there are these two cases in two different locations that share a lot of these similarities. So I don't know what it is about 1989, but they just had some weird shit going on, and just just so bad shit crazy. When they did try to ambush this figure, it unfortunately did not show up the next day, which
Oh,
is a problem, you know.
yeah, womp womp. That's a very unreliable figure, if you ask me.
Yeah. Multiple witnesses in the area claimed to see additional figures over the course of 5 days.
Oh, okay.
Exact similar figures, like to the T described.
Okay, so at least, there were others. At least he didn't leave him hanging. That's good.
Yes, and what happened in Voronezh seemed to be the culmination of an epic wave of sightings from all over the country that summer. And from there, reports flowed more freely in 1990 and pretty much the years that followed. So
Mm.
there were additional reports, I believe, at not many issues later in Flying Saucer Review, there was actually a list of a bunch of different reports. But you talked about one. What was it, like a crash case or something like that?
Oh, yeah. So it seems like 89 was like the year in Russia for like landings and really strange humanoid sightings and whatnot. But I did an episode back in November on crashes that came out of the Soviet Union, when they started kind of compiling all their files and releasing them to the United States, and or the reports were smuggled out by the
Mm-hmm.
likes of people like George Knapp and even Valet with a lot of the stuff that he brought back to the States. There was one, Rob, that really caught my attention. It was called the Grave of the Devil UFO crash. Yeah, and I can run through it pretty quickly if you want me to.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, man.
Cool. This one happened in August of 1991, allegedly. I want to put that caveat here. There was this huge object spotted on radar over the Caspian Sea, and the object was estimated to be around 2,000 feet long and about 300 feet wide, and it was traveling around 6,000 miles per hour. So the Russian Air Force, they sent up some MiGs to try to intercept this thing, and every time they got close to it, they described it as elongated and metallic. And when they got closer to it, they also saw this weird symbols and writing on it that they couldn't decipher. And they actually tried to fire some warning shots at this thing to be like, yo, we're here. We don't know what you are. We don't know why you're here. We want you to land or whatnot. So when they tried to fire these warning shots, their weapons went down. They did not work. Their engines started to fail. And they continued to try to follow this thing for like 45 minutes. And eventually, it was that situation where the closer they got, their instruments failed. The further they got away, they were okay. So they kind of tailed this thing for about 45 minutes, and then it completely just disappeared out of sight. A couple weeks later, there were rumors that this craft actually had crashed into the Shaitan Mazar mountain region, which is the Grave of the Devil mountain region, as it was termed. And they sent out this expedition group, the Russian Air Force and whatnot, to try to find it. There were also UFO researchers in this expedition group, several locals and mountain climbers. And after weeks of searching, some of the crew started getting really bad frostbite. They couldn't find anything, and they ended the expedition. The Russian authorities were looking to launch a second expedition, and they claimed to have found the wreckage. This was in November of 1991, so they sent out a helicopter to try to hoist a piece of the wreckage out, and the helicopter actually crashed, and everyone involved was killed. Then there was one last attempt made in 1992 to get the wreckage, and it was headed by Major German Svekov of the Air Force. And apparently they found the wreckage and the wreckage of the helicopter. And whatever this craft was, it was broken in half. And even from around 5,000 feet away, the members of the group said that they could feel this energy coming off of the wreckage. And when they get closer, they could actually see inside the craft. And they saw these weird beams in there and really cool, slick-looking flooring. And they also saw the symbols on the side of the craft that the pilots had seen weeks earlier on the craft they were pursuing. So this was presumably the same thing. And supposedly they took photos, but apparently, according to them, the energy field around it caused the film to be ruined, of course. And
it's classic
their video.
case.
Yep, I know, man. And video cameras, too. The video cameras wouldn't work. Womp womp. So the scariest part of all of it was that they did not find any bodies from the craft inside it, nor could they find any of the bodies from the helicopter crew that had crashed. So it was like all of the people involved with this, both human and whatever else, non-human maybe, had all vanished. And they set up markers and planned one last expedition to retrieve everything that was left there a few months later. And when this crew arrived, literally everything was gone. No wreckage of the craft, no helicopter. The only thing left there were skid marks in the ground where the craft had supposedly crashed. So this was crazy, man. Again, a lot of rumor, speculation, but this was one of the supposed crashes in Russia that came out of the files that they released. So, again, only a couple years after everything we talked about tonight. And it really does make you wonder, did this happen, or was this a fanciful story made up just to, I don't know, mess with the United States? Say they had bigger, better cases, like we're getting these juggernaut robots and all these cool hologram-esque aliens in Russia. What's America got? Little gray chodes going around abducting people. I don't know, man. I don't know what to make of it all.
Yeah, is the Voronezh landing the Russian government just like, puffing up their chest and trying to make themselves seem
well,
like
hey,
they... Yeah.
I should add, I know I brought up his name already, but Nick Redfern wrote a fascinating book about flying saucers in the Kremlin. And a lot of what he brought forward had a lot to do with, was the UFO topic a way of destabilizing the West, in a sense, send them these crazy stories, or some people think whatever crashed in Roswell was a Russian attempt at destabilizing our country and all that weird stuff. We even have stories of Soviet spies being inside UFO conventions back in the 50s, 60s, up through the 80s, or, even using the contactees in America as ways to promote communism in the United States. It's crazy, man. The games you can play with such a malleable phenomenon and mystery.
Yeah, there's a TikTok that I keep seeing that keeps coming up of this one town, and I can't remember where it is, but they essentially, there was only one bridge in and out of this town, and the U.S. government kept refusing to, pay to have this bridge repaired, and it was literally the only bridge that they had to get into town. So what did they do? They appealed to the Russian government, and because they appealed to the Russian government, the U.S. finally stepped in and paid for this damn bridge.
So that's what you got to do to get stuff done. Okay, that's good to know. I'm gonna reach out to some of my my Ruskies over there.
I mean, it's important, man. You've got to exploit those resources when you can.
Every time the subway goes down in New York now, man, I'm going to call up the Russians and be like, hey, can you get the W line back up, please? I got to get to work.
Yeah, seriously. Like, I don't have time for this crap. Just take care of it.
Someone call Putin, please.
We'll get this taken care of, toot sweet. So that right there, folks, is the craziness that is the brief glimpse of Russian ufology in the late 80s, early 90s. So, Ryan, thanks for coming on and talking about this weird stuff, this absolutely bonkers, Russian flap.
Yeah, man. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. These were some of the most colorful stories I've heard in a long time. So you did me a favor tonight, man.
The Somewhere in the Skies podcast is part of the LIONSGATE Sound Network. Please take a moment to rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever possible. Thank you for listening.